All right, welcome to this is our ninth episode of the Saturday Sauna Night podcast. And tonight, I'm really excited to have Kristin Ojaniemi here to talk. And if you follow any kind of UP based filmmaking, or if you watch TV6 or Discovering, then you probably know who Kristin is. And so I guess that's kind of where I want to start. So I didn't really get into Discovering until kind of late. I remember seeing Bucklevassar as a kid. Um,
Mhm.
and then I didn't really get into the outdoors, hunting and fishing and, um, all those things until a little later when Brian was hosting. But I remember seeing you on there occasionally. And then again, as I mentioned before, I found your documentary Upper River, which was really, really neat. Told a really unique story, just of the complexities of federal land and private land and all the different um, issues at play there. And so, can you, I guess, maybe just talk a little bit about? I mean, because you're primarily a filmmaker, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, storyteller, filmmaker. You do a lot with video and
Mhm.
I know photography too. Um, so can you maybe just talk a little bit about, um, I mentioned Upper River, but some of the films you've worked on, because I know they're pretty much all based on Upper Peninsula places and people, right? And stories.
Most of them, yes, not actually all of them.
Okay.
So Upper River was my first documentary I did, and I think I completed that in 2015. Yeah, that sounds about right. So that was the first documentary I did. At that time, I was working at a television station in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Ended up working there for 13 years, out of college. And Upper River was kind of like my weekend project for 2 years,
Okay.
getting that done, doing all the interviews and editing all that. And then that kind of really, I guess, jump started my filmmaking career, as you would call it. I did a lot of work after that with the Finnish American Heritage Center up in Hancock. So the next two feature documentaries and a couple shorts were done with them. Not all UP based, but some of them are. One was based in Florida, actually one in Connecticut and one in New Hampshire. So
Okay.
those ones took me all over the place.
Wow.
Um, and then really Discovering happened right after, I did those. I left the TV station. I had actually met Brian previously. He interviewed me when I did Upper River, and he did a story on the documentary and what I was doing. And that's when, I told him that someday I'd like to work for myself. And he's told me to give him a call when I do, and it was a few years later that I gave him a call. So, and he was wanting to put somebody else on the show and help him out, so it free up some of his time to work on some of his other projects. So it's been pretty much Discovering and some other video work for the last few years, and just now started getting back into doing some documentary work again, I guess.
Okay. Well, and so I wanted to ask then, um, I probably didn't really start watching Discovering until around 2016, 2017. Um, it was kind of funny. I actually, when, I don't know when they started posting the videos on the 906 Outdoors YouTube page,
Mhm.
but at my first job as I'm a high school science teacher, but on my lunch I would watch Discovering, and it just kind of yeah, it just kind of helped. It brought back memories of seeing that on TV as a kid, and just just the storytelling about why, it sounds cliche to say, but why the UP is so special. I mean, that's
Oh,
really what it's about. So I wanted to ask, so how long have you been working with Discovering?
I started producing stories in February of 2019.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, that's when I started producing stories. That's when I emailed Brian, and he's like, sure. So I did a story right away, and over the last 3.5 years, I've produced more and more
Yeah.
stories, quite frequently the past year. And then Brian decided that, he wanted to kind of semi-retire, focus more on his other business ventures, and then made the decision in end of September, for me to kind of take over the show.
Okay.
Yeah.
So initially, I mean, I know you had kind of filled in, right, as like a guest host from time to time, but did you do most of the filming then and the camera work?
From the beginning, all the stories that I've done all the camera work. I do all the editing and the writing, and you know, send Brian a little intro if I, you
Yeah.
know, he said that right away. Whoever he put on the show, he'd like, to do an intro and stuff. And I was a little hesitant at first to be on camera. You get used to it, I guess.
Yeah.
And so yeah, from the beginning, everything that you've heard my voice on, I've done the whole thing for.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wow. Um, well, and so kind of jumping around, but I wanted to go back to some of your own, work and documentaries you've done. Um, so for people who, I mean, haven't seen it, you said Upper River was your first documentary and it was initially kind of a weekend project. What spurred you on to make that project?
Upper River, I mean, definitely close to my heart. So the basis of the film is, there were these 100 and some hunting camps that were in the Ottawa National Forest. Originally, they were on leased land. They had leases with UP Power Company back in the about 1990-ish, 1992. UP Power Company sold the land to the Trust for Public Land, who then in turn turned it over to the U.S. Forest Service, to the Ottawa National Forest, with contingency that the U.S. Forest Service upholds these 15-year leases that was the final lease that was given to these camp owners, and then or 25 years.
Okay.
Okay, 25 years. It's been a few years. So in 2017, those leases expired. And so one of those leases was my parents. My dad built a camp in the mid 80s when I was a little kid. We call it Camp Wood Tick. So if you remember seeing the film and seeing Armis in there, he was probably the most featured. So that's my
Yeah.
dad.
Was that the one where you kind of had to it shows it there's footage of him kind of hiking down the hill with just because of, I mean, that's a pretty rugged landscape, so yeah.
Very rugged. Yeah, she was
Yeah.
on the bottom of a 400-foot hill that you have to kind of traverse down. It's an interesting location. It's a beautiful spot. I don't think anybody in their right mind would build a camp there other than him, but it was a pretty special place. So, growing up, he always said that he really, if anything ever happened to him, he had nothing to really hand down to me other than that camp. So, unfortunately, that came to be not the case. We had to
Yeah.
abandon it. So there was that. There was my dad's, and I knew of others. I knew this was coming. Kind of forgot about it a little bit, and then I don't know, the time was coming up, I don't, I started working, on the idea of the film probably I said I completed it in 2015. I said it took about 2 years to make. So I think I started in the beginning of 2014. So knowing this was coming up and always wanting to do a documentary, I went to college for film and video production, and documentary was one of my favorite classes. And I thought it would be a good film, good to tell the story, and maybe hopefully it would help change policy, or get some conversation started again about this whole issue. Got the conversation started. Some things came about it, but all in all, we did have to abandon the camps on January 1st of 2017. But my brother-in-law also had a camp, and I knew a lot of other people that had camps, and that's
Yeah,
where.
you know, um, probably around the same time you were working on that, I remember, so I have a buddy who, his grandpa had a camp, that was part of that whole lease.
Mhm.
And I remember, um, we were on a snowmobile trip, his family and my dad, myself, and a few other friends. And I remember sitting around at dinner, and his dad was kind of talking about that whole thing and talking about tearing it down and just, and I remember overhearing that and not thinking much of it, like, but being a little perplexed, I guess, like what that seems, like why that seems so wasteful. But then, years later, I'm teaching, well, the class, we actually called it conservation, but it was essentially an environmental science class for high schoolers. And I was trying to get some content on just discussing like public land and like the North American model of conservation and things like that. And I'm not even really sure how I found Upper River, but somehow in my Google searching, I did, and I started watching it. And I thought, okay, this is what my buddy and his dad were talking about the other year, and it's a powerful story. And I think if anything, um, just an important story to tell, and so people are aware, of those kinds of, like I said, complexities. I mean, it's like, I mean, I don't want to explain the whole plot of the film, but it's like, I mean, it's like the National Forest Service, the federal government, like not trying to be, malicious or anything, but just the politics of land ownership and so many things that can happen.
Mhm,
Um,
definitely.
and so you mentioned too, you've done some work with you said the Finnish American Cultural Center based out of Hancock
Yeah,
Heritage
Heritage
Center.
Center.
Yes.
Mhm.
Um, and so I had a chance to kind of browse some of that just on your website, but I haven't watched any of those yet. What sorts of pieces are those, or what kind of stories are?
Um, they vary. The first one we did was called Cooperatively Yours. It's You've driven through Bruce Crossing, pretty much half the town is Settlers Co-op. Got a gas station and grocery store
Yep.
there.
Yep.
It was founded originally by Finnish immigrants. They built the store, made it cooperative. It's community owned. It's not independently owned. And actually, I didn't know any of this until I did it, but the cooperative movement was really kind of brought here by the Finns in the early 1900s when they immigrated. I mean, here by the entire United States on that first model of cooperative businesses. Um, they brought they kind of brought that actually a little convoluted. It happened in Finland and the U.S. around the same time, but with the Finns. And at one point in time, there were just hundreds of these cooperative stores owned by Finns across what's kind of known as the Sauna Belt around the UP and northern Wisconsin and northern
Yeah.
Minnesota around Lake Superior. And I don't know how many. There's not very many left. When I did the film, I think there was 4 or 5 left of these original cooperatives that are still cooperatives.
But you said
And
Settlers is one of the originals then.
yeah, so it's one of
That's
the
really
original
cool.
ones.
I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
yeah. So it was
Yeah.
started in 1917. Um, so it's also unique that in 2017 it was its 100th anniversary. It was also the 100th anniversary of Finland's independence from Russia that same year. So kind of neat.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so it's just a really interesting story about the Finnish cooperative movement in the upper Midwest, and kind of told around the basis of Settlers Co-op. So some history, some Finnish heritage in there, and then we did a couple short ones. There was a Finnish hall in Newport Richey, Florida that had unfortunately had to shut down. So we kind of did a story about that before they had to close their doors. And then a gentleman that lives in Connecticut who's really involved with the Finnish American Society there. And then there was a feature length one we did called Circa about a woman. At the time we interviewed her, she was 98 years old, and she just lived a really just a colorful life, just an interesting life. She was the daughter of Finnish immigrants. We kind of jokingly called her the Forrest Gump of her time. Whenever there was something big, a big moment in U.S. history, she was there. She was born in 1920. Very intelligent. She served in World War II in the Supply Corps, following the troops like to Normandy and everywhere. She was the first woman on the East Coast to testify again in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee that she wasn't a communist. She got summoned Um,
Wow.
as a child, she was on the corner striking, or just with her mother, who was also was an activist for workers' rights and unions and 8-hour work days. So she tells stories about those, and strike breakers coming out and beating up women.
Oh gosh.
And the steel workers, yeah, the steel workers strikes in Ohio. And so I mean, just a very fascinating life. She actually wanted to be a Broadway actress, and she did go to New York for just a short period of time, try to become an actress. And she was just really involved right up until the day she passed. She was very involved in politics, and just a very interesting
I
woman.
pulled up I have your website open here on my phone. I'm just kind of reading the description of that one. Wow, that's that sounds like an amazing story. I'm gonna have to check some of these out because, like I said, so far I've only watched Upper River, but I know you have a lot of other work here. Um,
And then actually, I just started another one. I completed. It's called Born in the Barn. It's
yeah,
going to
I
be
was
a
gonna ask about that because
series.
you were just at Fresh Coast with
Yes,
that,
yes.
right? Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
So
that one, am I right in saying that one's split up as kind of a series almost?
yeah, I
Okay.
wasn't sure how to make it one film, so I was like, I can do what I want. I'll make them eight films.
Okay, sure.
So yeah, part one is done. It's
Okay.
on YouTube, on my YouTube page. It's kind of like a prologue teaser to the rest of the series. Like
Okay.
a 15-minute, and mainly focusing on the barn, which was the old gymnasium for the Trail Creek Panthers, the school there. And it's owned by Gary Forrest, who was on the 1972 Trail Creek basketball team that won a state championship. First and only boys team that won a state championship. So I like anniversaries. A lot of my stuff kind of ends up centered around anniversaries. So that's kind of where that started, knowing that, 2022 was the 50th anniversary of that win. So I was like, I had talked to somebody previously about, why is Trail Creek basketball so interesting? Kind of another historian. And, it's like, well, maybe I should do a film on it. And it was like 2022. It's perfect time. It was February of this past year. February was a little bit slower, for me. And it's
Yeah.
like, maybe it's time to make a documentary. And so I asked the school if it'd be okay if I, filmed the rest of the boys and girls seasons for a little bit of, B-roll video, something to help tell the story of basketball. And I had no idea that, the boys team was as good as they were. Feel a little guilty about that. That I hadn't been really following basketball here in the community, but they ended up going to the state final. And so I followed them. I filmed every tournament game during the season, went to the Breslin in Lansing and filmed and got all the footage actually from Valley Sports and the MSHAA. And so then after that, did a pile of interviews in the old gymnasium, like 22 interviews. And there's just so many different storylines and just so much history. And because in 72 the boys won a state championship, in 73 the girls won a state championship. That was the first time that Michigan had a basketball tournament for high school girls after the passage of Title IX. And so they went down and won the first one ever.
Wow.
And a Class D. And so, I mean, it's like, how do I fit this all in one? So it's like, I think it's also part cheating because it was going to be hard to make one film out of all this information and everything. So it's like, it'll be easier to edit and maybe easier to digest if I make it into 8 parts. So
Yeah.
part one's kind of prologue, part two will be the 72 boys, part three will be the 73 girls, and the other 70s girls, then the 80s boys, 80s girls, the 90s, and then 2022.
I think the thing with that though, so many people, um, or I should say, it almost seems like, yeah, I was gonna say so many people are documentaries, like even on the big streaming platforms right now, that seems to be the trend. Like, docu-series split up, into mini films almost, but 8 or 9 episodes. So I think I mean, I don't know. I think that's a cool way to do it just because it gives you that leeway and instead of trying to take so many interviews and stories and footage and um you know narrow it
compress it
down and
into a,
narrow it
yeah.
down into a 1 or 2 hour thing, you actually have that space, which is nice.
Yeah, and
But
then I'll
I'm
have like a
sure I don't
double
know a lot
angle
about
or even,
filmmaking. I'm sure it's a lot of time and editing to do that though too.
it is. It is a
Yeah.
lot of time in editing.
That's really like when I think about just some of the small towns we have in the UP and just some of the really intriguing stories with sports teams and stuff. That's I haven't I don't think I've seen the trailer yet, but I have seen I think like some of the picture like stills from it and just
Hmm.
kind of seeing the way you have the interviews set up in that gym and just the framing and the light, like it looks so good. Um like a true sports documentary. So
Yes, and I have to say
um
I didn't do that part alone. I knew I had in my head what I wanted to do,
yeah.
and everything I do is pretty much solo. I do all my own shooting, do my editing, just a one-woman camera crew. A lot of people are like, "Where's your camera crew?" It's like I am it.
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted those multiple angles. I wanted that wide shot to show, that space. So I did enlist the help of Aaron Peterson Studios.
Okay.
He runs the Fresh Coast Film Festival.
Yeah.
So he, I mean, definitely made those interviews look really good.
Okay. That's kind of cool though that you were able to collaborate like that.
Mm-hmm. That
Yeah.
was nice. Filmmaking is a team sport. Wish I could do
Yeah,
it with a team more.
for sure. Um, well, if I can jump back to discovering just for a couple minutes here. Um, I know we don't have too much more time, but I guess do you have a favorite story or episode you've done so far where, like you said, you've kind of done all the filming and the intro, like the whole thing?
Hmm. That's a hard question. I figured
Yeah.
I always get asked that, and I never have a good answer for that one.
Or even, a couple or, one
I have a
that
couple, I
particularly
guess.
stands out.
Um, so if you've been watching, I'm a bear hunter. So it's kind of my big hunting that I enjoy very much. The first time I did a bear hunting story was 2020. I went out with Upper Outdoors out on the Newberry end, out on the east end over the Newberry area, and I filmed a 16-year-old shooting a bear. It wasn't his first; he shot many of them, but he was still excited
Mhm.
and really cool. I mean, knowing how hunting works. I mean, to go out, on day one filming and you get that on camera was
Yeah.
pretty exciting.
That seems like everything would have to come together really perfectly for that to happen.
Exactly. And then so the next day, I wasn't sure if I was going to stay a day or 2 days or whatever. So John and I decided, John Ron, the bear guide, that I would sit the next day with his father because both father and son had first season tags. And the next day I sat with the father and he shot this like 400-pound black bear.
Oh, wow.
And that was the first time he had shot a Michigan black bear. So I mean, he was just jacked right up and just so excited. But just and then interviewed, the father and son together, and just the way that all played out, just the luck on that
Yeah. Because,
made that
well,
kind of one of my favorite experiences with filming, discovering. But as far as other stories, I've gotten to do some really great adventures. I went to Isle Royale for 8 days and kind of just filmed and just put together a story on my experience out there, and that was really really a lot of fun. And having that flexibility and that ability just to be able to go out there, experience it, and then come back and put together a story and throw it on TV.
yeah.
Show it to everybody. And obviously it's Isle Royale, so able to collect some really beautiful video out there. Didn't
Had you
see as many
been had you been
mooses I'd
out to the
like.
Isle Royale before that? Or was
No,
that your first trip
that was
out
my first trip.
there? Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't been, but that's definitely a bucket list thing.
Oh, I recommend it. I would go. I went in late May, early June. I think it was like June 1st or 2nd that we got off the island. And there's nobody there. I
Mhm.
mean, there's no bugs. The weather's not, the greatest, but it wasn't horrible. But I don't think you can ever expect to have great weather on Isle Royale anyways.
Yeah.
And but just the fact that there was barely any people there yet on the island. I'd hate to go in like height of the season and see, how many people. I mean, obviously I'm sure they do regulate how many people are out there because, can only handle so many. Um, that was just a really great time to go. So doing adventures like that, or backpacking the Porkies, or this year did Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore and
Mm.
backpacked that 42-mile stretch with my camera and did a story. I mean, those are all, you know, interesting. But I think also it's, you know, the people. I just really like meeting people, and I always feel bad when I never, you know, see them or hear from them again, because obviously time and everyone's busy and stuff, you know, just, you know, really enjoy, you know, the company of meeting all the people that I get to talk to. Um, so that's probably one of my favorite parts, and telling their stories and just meeting a lot of different people.
Yeah. No, and to me as a viewer, that's one of the things I really love about discovering is that it kind of takes you know, so many of the hobbies and interests that people up here have, but also um just the beautiful camera work and showcasing these outdoor areas and
Mm,
you know, featuring you know, some really cool people too
oh,
that
definitely.
kind of combining all those things into a, you know, a half-hour show. That's so great. Yeah.
Definitely. It's enjoyable. That's for
Yeah.
sure. And I get to see, you know, I've lived in the UP the majority of my life. There was a, you know, a few years in college and a few years in Wisconsin. But so many of the places that I've gone in the last 3.5 years, you know, around the UP, I'd never seen before. And you know, doing a story and putting a camera in my hand is just an excuse to go out there and do it and see it.
I love that. That's
Mm.
great. Yeah. Um, well, before we wrap up, do you have, I guess, um, I mean, I know you've been pretty busy with the Born in a Barn docuseries. So do you have I guess any other info about that, like as to when, you know, when could we expect to see uh
More.
more? Yeah.
My goal is to release another one every 2 months.
Okay.
So the part one was done mid-October. My goal is to have part two done by Christmas.
Okay.
Then part three done 2 months later. So that's my goal. Ideally I'd like to be sooner, but just taking over, you know, when I started that I hadn't taken discovering over fully.
Sure.
um so there's only so many times a day to put together an entire show every week. I mean, Brian's still on board. He's still helping. He's actually got this Monday show on a deer camp, and
Okay.
most of the following Monday show on Big Buck Night. So he's still around, still doing stories, so that helps me out quite a bit. But yeah, so every 2 months, and eventually I'll make a website. I just have to come up with a good name. Borninthebarn.com is taken and wants like
Oh,
$65,000 to sell it. So that's not worth it. And so it might be borninthebarnfilm.com or something. I don't know.
sure.
I gotta do that here in the near future. But right now they'll also be on my personal YouTube page.
And
Oh, I
then,
did do it. Sorry, to interrupt you. I did do a
oh, go ahead.
documentary on the Nonesuch mine in the Porcupine Mountains
Oh,
last year.
okay.
Um, I also did a discovering episode that's similar, taking some of the same footage. But if you go on the Friends of the Porkies YouTube page, I think it is, you'll find it.
Okay. That's
Mhm.
really cool. Yeah, we did a fall camping trip um out to the Porkies last year, 2021, and stayed at Union Bay. And we never actually made it out to the Nonesuch because there's a waterfall too there, right? Nonesuch
Yep.
Falls.
Nonesuch Falls is
And then I
there.
know there's kind of some ruins in the mine, but I'll have to
Yeah.
check that out.
Mhm.
Um, and
I'll
before,
update my personal website one of these days. It's
okay,
been a long time since I've updated that.
before my Zoom limit runs out here, I wanted to ask too, any particularly exciting discovering stories you have coming up that you're going to be working on, or you know, places you're going to be going, or anything like that in the near future?
Near future, I've got um I don't know, December I'll have like it'll probably take 2 episodes, but I filmed a traditional bow maker making a bow.
Oh,
Yeah, he's in Ontonagon. And that's a long process, so that might end up, you know, being put into 2 episodes. And
yeah,
then he talks about traditional archery, and I shoot the bow, not very well, but I did hit the target.
nice. Well,
First
that'll be
time I've
cool.
ever shot a traditional bow. So that was kind of interesting. So I have that shot ready to be put together. Also, the end of the month, I have one on wild rice.
Okay.
in Ojibwe. So the harvesting and just talking about wild rice and the processing of that. It's a story that's been done, on Discovering a few times, but try to freshen up that story and a little bit different,
Yeah.
a little bit new. That's the thing with, I mean, there's a lot of stories, but there's a lot of stories that do end up the same. We're always doing maple syrup, we're doing wild rice harvesting, we're
Oh yeah,
collecting
so many
more
things are
elk, but
seasonal, right? And just,
yes.
I mean,
Um,
like
you
deer
find
camp
different
every year,
people.
and
Deer
yeah,
camp every year, turkey hunting,
yeah.
ice fishing. They're the same, but different. There's always a way to make them different.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, I love how you mentioned, just being able to go out and see so many of these. I mean, there are so many places just around the UP that are, you can spend a lifetime exploring, really truly exploring, which is great.
Mhm.
Um,
I'd also like to do, I have a lot of video of times that we didn't catch anything or we didn't shoot anything. So I
mhm.
have this grand plan to do like an episode, like it's a fishing no catching or a hunting no shooting.
Yeah.
Or, and just to, show the reality and the fact that, because I feel like sometimes, these Discovering not so much, but other shows that you watch on TV on the Sportsman's Channel, the Outdoor Channel, they make it look like you just walk out there and you shoot an animal
Yeah.
or
And
catch
it's like that too on so
on
many
YouTube.
social
Yeah.
media pages that,
Yeah.
Instagram and other platforms. It definitely is misleading. So I can as someone who does a lot of fishing and ice fishing, I can appreciate that for sure.
Look for that coming up too sometime.
And so I have to ask too, just as a final question, I know you said you're big into bear hunting, but are you planning on deer hunting at all this year?
Oh, it is that time. It's like in what, like 5 days.
Yeah, that's
I'll probably do a little bit of rifle hunting.
okay.
My boyfriend shot a buck in bow season, so we
Okay.
got that in the freezer. We've got my bear meat in the freezer, so our freezer
Oh, so you got a
probably
bear
does
this year too.
not need him. What's that?
You got a bear this year too.
I did.
Oh, very nice.
So if you go on my YouTube page, I did do a story on the hunt. So I filmed the hunt, and the processing of it, a local processor. And then I brought the hide to a taxidermist, which once he gets the hide back and starts putting it together, I'm doing a full mount. I'll film that process, and I did an interview with the taxidermist already. And then I brought the skull to a guy in Marquette who cleans skulls with beetles.
Oh,
Um,
that's really
so
cool.
even you'll see what happens to the bear throughout the entire
Yeah.
process. So
Wow. All right.
those are coming up too. But yes. So yes, I will deer hunt a little bit, not too hardcore, just because we
Okay.
don't really
Yeah.
need any more
No,
meat in the freezer.
it's sometimes it's just nice. I mean, as you know, it's just nice to be out there and
It is,
just kind
and I
of
probably,
experience it all.
yeah, my deer blind is behind the house, so I might just, even if I don't take the gum in, just take the camera and my cup of coffee and go sit back
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, Kristen, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Really enjoyed talking with you, and I'm definitely gonna have to go check out some of these other films we talked about. Um,
Please
but
do. Let me know what you
thank,
think.
yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, of course.
All right, this has been Saturday Sauna Night with Kristin Ojaniemi. Thank you.